Hello, welcome to Floor Chats with Ella. So for my interview project, I interviewed Brianne Brown and Hillary Potter. Brianne is hearing and Hillary is deaf, and they both work for FNDC, the Family Network of Deaf Children. Hillary also works with DYT, Deaf Youth Today, and both of them plan events for deaf children. FNDC typically focuses on events for deaf children and their families, whereas Deaf Youth Today is more of a camp of sorts for deaf children. So Hillary went to DYT camp when she was young, and she later became a camp counselor for several years volunteering. 4 years after that, she started working in deaf youth outreach trying to position my notes somewhere. Deaf youth outreach and language development for deaf youth. And that's how she came into her role as an event planner for Deaf Youth Today and FNDC. Brianne has 2 or 3 children. I couldn't really figure it out. And either the youngest 2 or the youngest 1 is deaf, and went to or goes to Deaf Youth Today camp over the summer as well. Hornby Island for deaf camp. I don't know if that's Deaf Youth Today camp or if that's different. It's a family deaf camp. And she was also a volunteer interpreter for 2 years there at that camp. For 2 years. And the main reason she got involved in her work in FNDC as an event planner is because of her daughter, who is deaf, and she thinks that connections in the deaf community, especially for deaf children, are very, very important since the community is, of course, so small. What else? Next page. Brianne has taken the interpreting program, so this is sort of prerequisite work for the role of an event planner in the deaf community. So Brianne has taken the interpreting program, but she hasn't done any other schooling or training for her job, so no event planning course in particular. And she also thinks that her volunteering experience in the deaf community, along with being a supportive ally, has helped her acquire skills and hands-on experience for her role that she sort of relies on in her day-to-day. But she thinks that the best way to become skilled in her position as an event planner in the deaf community is to simply go for it and get the hands-on experience as you do the job. Hillary is deaf, and she relies more on her life experience as a deaf person. So she had deaf role models to look up to when she was a camper, when she was young. And she had or has lots of opportunities to grow and be involved in events for the deaf through her sports teams when she was in school, through the student council when she was in school. I think it was the model student council, I believe, and in camp as well, of course. And her old job, I'm not sure what that was, had very little to do with children, but it did help her improve her problem-solving skills and her communication skills. And she also didn't take any school or training for her job, but agrees that the hands-on experience is very valuable in her position. So the types of events that they plan through FNDC, again, it's more family events, so it's focused on the parents and the children as well. Where'd I go? Oh, so some examples are picnic and sandwiches in the park. They use that sign. I'm assuming that's sandwiches, but it could have been picnic. Or they go to jungle gyms. For example, Mari told us about the event from a few weeks ago that she took Mackenzie to, where they went to Crash Crawlies. So jungle gyms like that. I also saw both Hillary and Brianne at the Wizard of Oz play that I went to over the weekend on Thursday, which was amazing. So I believe that FNDC might have had something to do with that play, because I saw both Hillary and Brianne there. I'm not sure what they might have had to do with that, but I'm assuming there was some connection. So as I said, FNDC events are more about welcoming everybody. So hearing deaf, hard of hearing, whether they sign or whether they talk, oral, etc. Most parents of deaf youth are hearing, so most of the FNDC events have interpreters there for them to help navigate communication for those that don't sign, but they do encourage and advocate for signing. At Deaf Youth Today, it's more for deaf and hard of hearing children and people. Well, I'm children, deaf youth. But all levels of ASL learning are welcome, so you could just be fingerspelling, you could be learning ASL, you could be very new to it, or you could be a very proficient signer that's been signing since like you were very young. And they welcome and encourage all levels of signing there. However, it is voice off, and they do have whiteboards, and they can gesture, write on their phone, write on paper if they need to, but they do encourage signing, and it is voice off. As far as advertising goes, I know that obviously for most events you need advertising or else nobody will be there, right? Yeah. So they use flyers for advertising and post them up around their facilities. So the Deaf Youth Today, I'm assuming it's a building of some sort, I've never been there, but they have flyers around there for when people come in to use their other services, and they can advertise that way. They also post on Facebook in their Facebook groups if there's an event coming up, and they will send emails or letters to people that are on their mailing list, and also just spoken word, of course. They're like from word of mouth, I believe, is the exact phrasing that Brianne used. People will learn about an event and tell other people about the event, and that's also another way that the information can spread. So the planning process for most of their events look pretty much the same as any hearing event. They have to find their location. There isn't usually a theme because it's more about communication and just deaf youth being around other deaf youth. So they find their location, they choose a date, and they typically focus on a date that's a good time for traveling, because a lot of their attendees are either from out of BC or from the far corners of BC, so they're from all over the place. It's not just local Vancouver and Burnaby. And so they choose good dates for people for traveling as well, so they do tend to keep that in mind. Their events are accessible. I asked a lot of questions about like the access in their events, and they both agreed that typically their events are focusing on access for deaf and hard of hearing youth and their parents. However, if an attendee is wanting to come but they are in a wheelchair, or they have additional needs or challenges, if they're deafblind, etc., they can and will make accommodations for them. However, they do tend to focus on deaf and hard of hearing needs and accommodations in that sense. I think. Oh, and also if an event has some form of accessibility feature, like they did ice skating over the winter, they added to their poster that it was accessible for wheelchairs and strollers. A lot of parents, they mentioned, tend to bring their children in a stroller. So they added to their flyer and to their digital copy of their flyer that they sent through their mailing list that it was accessible for strollers and wheelchairs. However, if something is inaccessible, they will also add that to their poster. So if it's like a star show at the planetarium or something like that that's in a dark room, they'll also add that might not be great for like visual or low vision attendees, or it has dim lighting, so just be advised, something like that. I believe that because FNDC uses interpreters at their events, one of the main differences between a hearing event and a deaf event would be the fact that you would need to be very, not careful, but conscious about when you would book your interpreters, and that would have to be something that you keep in mind most of the time. And yeah, that's kind of it. I don't know if their events have funding or if they have much funding. I'm assuming they have funding through their respective organizations, but outside of that, I don't believe they do fundraisers for their events. I believe it's just kind of, they have the event in their facility, so in an event space within their facility, so people know where it is. It's easily accessible for people that are already there, or going to FNDC or DYT. And yeah, other than that, the differences between a hearing and a deaf event of that kind would kind of just be, you don't need a DJ. I don't think it requires quite as much planning, because I do believe that the main goal of a lot of these deaf events that DYT and FNDC host are about socialization in a more well-rounded way than a lot of hearing events I've been to are. Most hearing events have some point that, or some theme or some goal that isn't just communication and socialization and socializing, socializing, whereas the DYT and FNDC events tend to mostly focus on deaf youth interacting and forming connections and community and building bonds with other deaf youth. And yeah, it was very interesting. So thank you, Brianne and Hillary.